have a dream that all men are created equal.
No justice! No peace! Black lives matter!
Enough is enough. Their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom.
We're marching to overcome poverty, racism, and violence.
We cannot walk alone.
This is a Fox 45 Town Hall. Your voice, your future. Hello, everyone. I'm Kai Jackson. Welcome to our Fox 45 Town Hall, where we stand on the dream. That's the question. Where do we stand on the dream today? Nearly 60 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and spoke about his dream of civil and economic rights for all and the end of racism in America. Well, a lot has happened since the March on Washington in 1963. That includes the passing of the Civil Rights Act in July of 1964, outlawing discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or nationality. A year later, the Voting Rights Act outlawed voter discrimination on the basis of race. In 1967, the first black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, is sworn in from Baltimore. 1972, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm is the first woman and first person of color to run for a major political party's presidential ticket. 1987, Baltimore sees its first black mayor with Clarence Du Burns, then elects Mayor Kurt Schmoke, who had been a former prosecutor. In 2008, President Barack Obama is elected as the country's first African-American president. And of course, in 2020, Kamala Harris is the first woman and first person of color to be elected as Vice President of the United States. The reality, though, is it's not all been good. In 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Race riots broke out in Los Angeles in 1992, following the police beating of Rodney King. Also, the countless deaths of African Americans at the hands of police, and also crime happening in black communities, from Freddie Gray to George Floyd in the instance of the police. And violent protests have erupted across the country over police brutality. It is clear there is still a lot of work to do. And that's why tonight we're having this town hall, to have the tough conversations surrounding race. So joining us tonight are Claudia Barber, a former D.C. administrative law judge; Delegate Sandy Bartlett, a Democrat who represents Anne Arundel County; Harold Llyod III, the president of the NAACP Youth and College Division; Bishop Antonio Palmer, senior pastor of the Kingdom Celebration Center; and Carl Snowden, author and former civil rights director for the Maryland Attorney General's office. We want to welcome all of our guests tonight, and we certainly appreciate them being here to have this conversation with us. First, Judge Claudia Barber. Judge Barber, following the death of George Floyd last year, we saw protests erupt around the country, of course here in Baltimore as well, surrounding the use of police force on African Americans. Has the death of George Floyd, in your estimation, and the protests done anything to move our country forward?
Yes, it has, in that the George Floyd death was something that caused us to examine in a more scrutiny way police reform. And what I mean by that is it caused us to look more carefully and scrutinize how we should be hiring police in general. We've got to change that dynamic and make sure that the police force is filled with people that are truly there to serve and protect, not to kill unarmed people.
Judge Barber, thank you very much. I want to bring in Delegate Sandy Bartlett. Delegate Bartlett, this issue of police reform has been discussed even in the Maryland legislature in Annapolis. Can you tell us what we could see this legislative session?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we will see a great deal of discussion with respect to police reform. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and I know that our Speaker Adrian Jones, is very interested in and has a very is very attuned to all the problems that we've had over the past 9 to 10 months, and as well as over the past years. So there has been legislation introduced. There will be certain packages introduced. We will have a juvenile perspective. We will have a public information records perspective. It has been said by leadership that we will have a repeal of the law officer Bill of Rights, because that has been very controversial, and it has prohibited family members who have lost a loved one to police violence from finding out just in fact what happened. So that level of transparency has been discussed. We will discuss it further. We will also look towards, with respect to implicit bias training for law enforcement, and also mental health requirements, assessment requirements. So there's a great deal of discussion. There was a work group that met over the interim, and they have a list of bills that the speaker will put out, as
Sure.
well as a juvenile bill I have.
Delegate Bartlett, I want to ask you a quick follow-up before I move on to our next guest. But give me a quick answer here. We know, and I'm sure many of you would agree, police officers have a very difficult job, and we hear it often. By and large, most officers, the women and men who serve, whether it's Baltimore or whether it's Minneapolis or San Francisco, go out and do a very difficult and a good job every single day. Where will officers be in this conversation? Because it seems like what we have across the country is this confrontational discussion between police and between the citizenry. Police officers are in our family. They're our mothers, they're our fathers, our sons, our sisters, our brothers. They're not people who come from some other place and then come and police. So let's figure out, how is that going to work, Delegate Bartlett? That discussion of making sure police and citizens talk together about the Bill of Rights and about how policing should look in communities.
Exactly. Well, you know, our law enforcement has been a part of the conversation throughout the interim, as well as last year's work group. They are part of the conversation. They've made presentations, and what I'm hearing is from law enforcement is that they want to rule out or rid out the bad apples. It is a high esteemed position to be one to protect and serve, and those who are there for the right purposes have the hindrance of having those who are not there for the right purpose. And so they support some of the changes they won't support, but it is a matter of discussion, and they have been included throughout all of the discussions.
Thank you, Delegate Bartlett. Let me bring Carl Snowden in now, because he has a very interesting perspective here as well. Mr. Snowden, police have undergone bias training, as Delegate Bartlett was talking about, in departments like Baltimore, actually under a federal consent decree right now. Are these tools, in your estimation, helping ease tension and relations between community and police, or do you think they could be making things worse?
First of all, Mr. Jackson, thank you for this opportunity to have us participate in this town hall discussion. And as you said in your introduction remarks, we need to have some frank and candid conversation. The fact of the matter is that just last week, we now know that scores of police officers was part of the demonstration at the Capitol, where they were participating in what some is called insurrection. The African American community know for a fact that that police officers are not monolithic, but the historical relationship between African Americans and the police have not been good. Baltimore City recently reported that, again, you have to settle cases because police officers were not treating citizens of Baltimore properly. Here in Anne Arundel County, we had a police officer who's been suspended for using excessive force. This is following George Floyd. This is 2021. So I don't think that, I don't think we've done enough. The fact of the matter is, I think we need to do more. And we need to change the way police operate in the African American community. And I'll end on this note. There's no question in my mind or anybody else's mind that if the number of black police officers killed white people at the rate white police officers were killing black people, this country wouldn't stand for it for 1 second. President-elect Biden made it very clear. He said that if the demonstrators who came to Washington, D.C. and had breached the security of the Capitol had been black, they would have been treated far different than these white, conservative right-wingers who went in. So let's not kid ourselves. We've got a long way to go, and Dr. King's dream, we've not even begun to scratch the surface yet.
Carl Snowden, thank you. We'll come back to you, and we do want to acknowledge your years of service towards civil rights and other issues in Maryland and in particular in Anne Arundel County and with the NAACP. Bishop Antonio Palmer, thank you for joining us with Kingdom Celebration Center. How do you look at this? Despite the issues between the African American community and police, we are still seeing murders in Baltimore. In fact, 2020 was the 6th straight year that the city saw more than 300 murders. And sadly, we're reporting today on Fox 45, and I know you saw it and you heard about it, the director of Safe Streets, Dante Barksdale, whose mission was to stop gun violence in the city, was shot and killed. We want to extend our condolences to Mr. Barksdale's family and, of course, honor his memory and legacy for what he did. This is what Mr. Barksdale's childhood friend had to say about his murder. Listen to this, Bishop Palmer.
The whole city is aware of this one. Everyone in their office is aware of this one. Everyone in the streets, every Blood, every Crip, every BGF member, every GD Blood, everyone is aware of this one.
So, Bishop Palmer, my question to you is, how can the community curb the violence that's out here that people are dealing with right now when leaders themselves are becoming victims?
Thank you, Cal, again for hosting this town hall. And for the question, we definitely have leaders that are out there on the front lines, and this is the sacrifice that we make. It's sad, and we do express our deep condolences for the family of Mr. Barksdale. But the church and other leaders, other civic organizations, other black leaders that are out there on the front lines, the church, again, we recognize that we should be the pillar of the community, and that if we're going to serve, it doesn't mean just we have tremendous food distributions, but we have to get out there, just like Safe Streets are out there, and other organizations like We Are Us that are on the front lines, that are trying to get our communities back, because I always say we are 400 years behind, and a lot of systemic racism has dealt us, the bad hand. And so we're on now trying to make sure that leaders understand that when we're out here, it's a big price to pay. And so we have to do it from the heart.
Bishop Antonio Palmer, we're going to come back to you. Don't go anywhere. And Bishop Palmer, we want to acknowledge the very special role the black church has had in America as one of the only places people could safely gather and organize at a time of great peril, even death, to African Americans for even gathering. So again, thank you for what you do. And I do want to get back to that point, because I think to that end, you may have something to offer here. I reached out to some of my friends tonight about our town hall, and I want to introduce some of what they said. Kenyatta Moon is a mother, an educator, and child advocate from Baltimore, and says that she asked her daughters about where are we with the dream, our question that we're asking in the town hall tonight, right? Well, she says her 14-year-old daughter replied with, and I'm quoting here, "Well, now we can technically go anywhere we want. We just can't walk there." When Moon asked what she meant, her daughter replied, "Because as black people, it's not safe for us to just be out there walking anywhere," end quote. Harold Lloyd III with the NAACP, let's talk about this a little bit. You hear this is from a 12 and 14-year-old girl to her mother, or their mother, I should say tonight, Kenyatta Moon, who's an advocate in Baltimore doing great work. And I want to acknowledge you in the fact that any great movement in this country, probably worldwide, has always been led by young people. So thank you for what you're doing. But how do you respond to that when young people, teenagers, are saying that they can't walk anywhere because they're living in fear?
Well, to start it off, Huey P. Newton said, the young always inherit the revolution. So with that being said, as we see new movements spark up day by day, year by year, the young, we start to see everything. You know, we start to finally get a grasp of the world that our parents tried to protect us from. And what she means when we can't walk anywhere, I mean, it's pretty evident when you think about it. When you think about Trayvon Martin, who was walking back to his house. When you think about Tamir Rice, who was playing at the park. These are two individuals who were under 18 years old when they were killed in the hands of white supremacists, in the hands of police, and no one got convicted of that. So it's a constant fear, and this isn't a fear that just happened this decade, this century. It's been since the 90s. Our communities, black communities, have never had a great relationship with police departments. And even when we try to reconcile the relationships and strengthen the relationships, it always seems as though the police department are giving us the bad end of the stick. Politicians are giving us the bad end of the stick and not giving us enough resources, not allocating enough funds for us, not allocating enough funds for the schools, as you can see in Baltimore City. And I'm analyzing this from Annapolis.
And Mr. Lloyd?
So when you deprive a... Yes?
All right, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I did want to ask you this. Now, some observers will look and hear what you say, but then also ask you, okay, Mr. Lloyd, you're out here, you're working in the community. Where is your outrage over Dante Barksdale being killed? Where is your outrage over other black citizens in black communities being killed? How would you respond to that?
Oh, of course I'm furious. I don't want to see anybody die. And I don't want to see any kid have a gun. I don't want to see kids who are addicted to drugs. I don't want to see kids who are dropping out of school because they're not being taught. I don't want to see kids not having resources, not having an equal opportunity to success. And when you deprive communities of equal opportunity for success, when you make sure that communities are living in poverty and your elected officials aren't doing anything, of course bad is going to happen. Of course the cycle is going to perpetuate. Until you make the right decisions, until you allocate the right funds, until you give the kids the right amount of education to be successful, the right amount of resources to be successful, you will see generations after generations after generations doing the same cycle over and over again, harming our community.
All right.
But I can say this, though.
Go ahead, quickly. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Guns and drugs don't come from our community. They're brought there, by the way.
And that's a discussion.
So when we think about violence, we have to remember that.
Yes, sir. I acknowledge that, and that is a discussion we should have too. So hold that thought. Let's switch gears here a moment because we do have a lot of important things to talk about. Another big topic, obviously, where Dr. King's dream is, violence that's happening across America, but we also have to talk about the coronavirus pandemic. According to the CDC, COVID-19 is impacting African American and Hispanic communities at a much higher rate than the general population. Well, how can the state help? That's a question, obviously, we're asking as journalists. Well, the COVID-19 vaccine is now rolling out, but there is some distrust within the black community because of historical wrongs, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Could this vaccine help mend the historical wrongdoings? Well, in order for the country to get past COVID, we need African Americans to take the vaccine. That's what a lot of authorities and folks are saying in order to reach herd immunity. So the big question here is, how can we get past this hurdle? And for that, I'm going to ask Judge Claudia Barber to come back in here. Judge Barber, there is some mistrust here. How do you think the black community can get past some of the historical fear of things like vaccines?
Well, I'm not convinced that the community can all 100% get past that disparity, because the Tuskegee experiment was a horrible, deplorable, we have to acknowledge that, it was a deplorable event and incident. And it speaks to the need for the unpopular discussion of reparations in this country. But to the extent that we're dealing with the COVID-19 vaccine and the fact that we want to try to promote this along. It is okay, I believe, for the community to be concerned about the safety and how safe the vaccine is. I think that's a relevant and important point that causes us to pause and say, well, wait a minute, you know, I want to make sure, is it the Pfizer vaccine that's better than the Moderna vaccine, or is it, you know, another vaccine that's coming out that's better? We want to make sure that we're at the forefront and we have the option to choose. Yes, it's helpful when we see political officials taking the vaccine, but at the same time, there has been too many wrongs in this country in the area of medicine and even how we're treated when by doctors. You know, that's right at our forefront. You have, you know, you have concerns about disparity in care. Sure. Mm-hmm. A physician was actually lost her life, and she believes she was mistreated in Indiana hospital. So there's always a concern there. Right. And I don't think it can just immediately 100% disappear.
Okay, a very, very important thing to keep in mind there, Judge Barber. Thank you. And let's continue our discussion. And again, for those folks who are just joining us, we're talking about where are we today, almost 60 years after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C., in the March on Washington. Where are we with that? And of course, you're going to get an array of opinions about that, and that's exactly what we want. Let's talk about the economy right now. The coronavirus has not only affected people's health, but also their livelihoods. Here's a look at the unemployment numbers from last year. We ended 2020 with 6.5% unemployment, but when broken down by race, Black and Hispanic unemployment was nearly 10%, and we're seeing the impacts of the wealth within the Black community of not having jobs. Businesses are closing and lower home ownership. Those are all things people are concerned about. So let's get that as a discussion point here right now. Delegate Sandy Bartlett, let's talk about that. I do want to bring up that initially, this was earlier under the Trump administration, and the president continued to talk about this, and I know he's leaving office here in a couple of days, but in August of 2019, Black unemployment was 5.7%. It was 7.5% when he took office in January of 2017. What would you say about the current president's claim that African Americans have fared better under his leadership?
I would say, and quite frankly, there's so much that is incorrect that comes out of President Trump's mouth that this is, again, one of them. You know, the statistic that shows that African Americans have fared better is not looking at the micro data of what's going on. Unfortunately, I have heard the horror stories of people seeking unemployment, and the data of unemployment does not accurately reflect the claims of individuals who are seeking to be reimbursed. It doesn't turn over quickly enough. It doesn't accurately reflect if you are waiting to be, you know, if your claim is just sitting there. It doesn't accurately reflect if you started receiving money and then all of a sudden you stop receiving money for whatever reason. So no, I'm sorry, I wouldn't trust it. I know what I hear. I know the calls that I get and the emails that I get in my office. And quite frankly, it has been the stuff that keeps me up at night, right. And my staff.
Delegate Bartlett, because let me interrupt you just really quickly. One of our reporters here at Fox 45, Amy Simpson, has really done an outstanding job at really kind of exploring those claims for unemployment benefits, and a lot of people simply can't get into the system. She's asked the governor about this. What would you say to Marylanders who are watching this, particularly Black Marylanders who are like, I need my benefits. I can't pay my mortgage. I can't, you know, pay for food, pay for medicine, pay for my car, those types of things. What can you tell citizens watching this tonight?
Exactly, and that's the basics of what I'm talking about. Not even being able to talk to someone at the unemployment office. The reason why the General Assembly has been so much involved is because we have started becoming the middle person, or the conduit between the unemployment office and our constituents. What I also serve on the a joint cybersecurity committee, and I have asked that we at least through the the Department of IT, to at least set up a system so that a person, when they call, and they call, and I'm hearing that they call and they let it ring 200, 300, 400 times, and they get no answer, and then eventually they get disconnected. Right. Okay, and this is happening for days and months. And then we get a governor's, a press conference saying that the system's fine and not everyone's going to get a check. The system is not fine. The system is not working. You should at least be able to have someone to pick up the phone. If you can't pick up the phone, at least respond to an email. Your status should not be simply that it is new, or that we will get back to you and not getting back to you. Right. So our offices, quite frankly, the General Assembly has become the conduit, and we are making those calls to the unemployment office and then getting back to our constituents.
All right, very good, Delegate Bartlett. Let's move on quickly here. Finally, we'd like our panelists to quickly answer the progress that they've seen since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Had a Dream speech, and where do you think more work needs to be done? Harold Lloyd, let's start with you. Take it away.
Well, as Mr. Snowden said earlier, we haven't even scratched the surface. People always say that Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, they were ahead of their time. When truth of the matter is, we're just so far behind. We're 50 plus years behind. The stuff we're fighting for now, it should have been solved 50 plus years ago. However, we realized how corrupted the system is, and it's our job to dismantle that system and rebuild a system that will be perfect for all human beings and every citizen in America.
Judge Claudia Barber, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with wholeheartedly with what Harold Lloyd just says. We're just scratching the surface. It took 368 years for the first African-American woman to be appointed to the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County. That's abominable. And to the extent that, this nation says that all men are created equal, that we have equality of opportunity. If that were true, why did it take 368 years for that to happen? And I could go on and on. There are no African-American males on the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County, on the Circuit Court for Montgomery County, on the Circuit Court for Charles County, and I could go on and on and on and on and on. So no, there's no equality of opportunity in that regard.
All right, Delegate Bartlett, it's your turn, and I want to share with you that today I talked not only about Dr. King with my two daughters, I talked about Shirley Chisholm and other women, in particular black women, who have been instrumental in the civil rights movement.
Yes, there has been a lot of black girl magic going on, and I'm quite excited to be a part of that. I will say that I was recently elected chair of the Anne Arundel County delegation. I am the first African American to hold that position. I'm quite excited about that. However, there is so much work to be done. We have, first of all, as Judge Barber said, we have to be in the room to hold the conversation, to hold the mirror up, because no one fights for our interests quite like we do, or knows our perspective the way that we do. And it's very important to continue to put African Americans in all the boardrooms, in all elected positions, in the judgeships, in ownership, business ownership. It's extremely important. And so yes, there's a lot of work to be done.
All right, let me get on. Thank you, Delegate Bartlett. Carl Snowden, please.
Well, I think if anybody want to know where Dr. King's dream is today, the two things they should do. One, drive down Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. See the squeezy boys who are trying to survive. Look at the homeless and the dispossessed. Look at the fact that Dr. King's dream isn't even close to being achieved. But I don't want to leave on a negative note or a pessimistic note.
Right.
There are some things happening that are happening for the better. And one of the things I want to do in the short time that I have is just thank African American people, because despite all that we've gone through, and we've gone through a lot, we continue to have hope, we continue to wish for the best, and just this year, there would be no Vice President Harris or President Joe Biden had it not been for African American voters.
Right.
All over the nation who responded to the call that Dr. King once said, which was this. Dr. King said the greatest march that an American can participate in a democracy is the march to the ballot box. And African Americans responded to that appeal. Right. So I think, one, we need to deal with the issue of poverty, and two, understand that the struggle continues.
Carl Snowden, thank you. And we're going to end with Bishop Antonio Palmer. Bishop Palmer, your final thoughts.
Thank you, Kai. My final thoughts would be that that over 70 million people voted for a racist, narcissist, to try to re-elect him, and he eventually started a coup and anarchy and treason against our own democracy. I think that we have far to go. There have been some accomplishments, but we, for instance, like we just had a new African-American female chief of police in Anne Arundel County, and also body cameras are coming to Anne Arundel County for the police officers. And we're also in talks for a civilian review board for police reform. But there's much more. We're praying that that we can pass the blueprint for Maryland. Also, we're fighting for more affordable housing and to push for more capital for businesses, black-owned businesses and loans. Finally, I'd like to say that the church has to get into a deep dive conversation, because all of this really was created by Pope Nicholas V, who started what we call, who wrote the papal bulls in the 1400s that declared or authorized for the King of Portugal to be able to do what he did as far as commencing slavery and the conquering of the indigenous people here in America. We need to have that discussion as the church to bring healing. Right. If there's no spiritual healing, the country is going to continue to be the way it is.
Okay, well, let's make sure we have that conversation, Bishop Palmer. I think that's worthy of talking about as well. I can't believe the time has flown by this quickly, guests, but thank you for being here and thank you for the time. We're not going to get everything in, and I want to thank my friends who gave me comments tonight, but I couldn't get them all in. Cameron Miles, thank you, and thanks to my other friend who also believes that we must, in his words, elect people not based on skin color, but based on their abilities. Thank you as well, my friend. Well, we want to thank everybody for their time and expertise tonight, and it is clear that we've made some progress in reaching Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, but there's still a lot of room for improvement and a lot of work to do. And this conversation continues. This will not be the end of what Fox 45 does, but we do thank you for joining us. Continue the discussion. Continue to go to our website. Please continue to go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Fox Baltimore. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.